What would you do if your mountain of debt was suddenly erased by a dead stranger's secret? When 32-year-old Eleanor inherited a rotting, condemned house, she thought it was the final curse of her ruined life. But the terrifying discovery behind a crumbling basement wall didn't just change everything, it almost ended her life. Eleanor Gallagher was drowning. At 32, she was sitting in a cramped studio apartment in Boston, staring at a stack of final notices. Her recent divorce from her ex-husband, Greg, hadn't just broken her heart, it had financially ruined her. Greg had quietly racked up over $80,000 in joint credit card debt to fund a failed tech startup before fleeing to Arizona, leaving Eleanor to face the aggressive calls from collection agencies. She was working 2 jobs, as a medical billing specialist by day and a waitress by night, just to keep the heat on. Then came the heavy, cream-colored envelope. It was stamped by the law offices of William Hodges, a probate attorney based in a small, coastal town in Maine called Blackwood. The letter was brief but world-shattering. Eleanor's great-aunt Beatrice had passed away at the age of 91. Having outlived all her immediate relatives, Beatrice had named Eleanor as the sole heir to her estate, which consisted entirely of a property located at 42 Sycamore Drive. Eleanor barely remembered Beatrice. Her childhood memories of the woman were blurry, a tall, imposing figure who smelled of mothballs and peppermint, who never smiled, and who had been ostracized by the rest of the Gallagher family for being difficult. But a free house? That was a lifeline. Eleanor immediately calculated how much she could sell a property for in coastal Maine. Even a modest home could wipe out her debt and give her a fresh start. Taking a desperate leave of absence from her jobs, Eleanor packed her rusted sedan and drove 4 hours north through a punishing autumn rainstorm. When she finally pulled up to 42 Sycamore Drive, her heart sank. The house was a disaster. It was a sprawling, Victorian monstrosity that looked as though it were actively trying to sink into the earth. The slate roof was caving in, the wraparound porch was completely rotted through, and thick, strangling ivy crept up the peeling, lead-painted siding, shattering the first-floor windows. It didn't look like a lifeline. It looked like a tear-down. Waiting for her on the broken porch was William Hodges. He was a sharply dressed man in his late 50s, his expensive wool coat completely at odds with the decaying surroundings. "Miss Gallagher, I presume?" Hodges said, his smile tight and impatient. He didn't offer his hand. "I'll be frank, the property is condemned. The town council has been trying to seize it for unpaid property taxes for a decade. Beatrice fought them tooth and nail, but now that she's gone, well, the tax lien is substantial." Eleanor's brief hope evaporated. "How much is the lien?" $35,000, Hodges replied smoothly. He watched her face fall, then quickly added, "However, you are in luck. I represent a local development group, Whitmore Holdings. They want to bulldoze this eyesore and build luxury condos. They are willing to pay the tax lien and offer you a sum of $45,000 in cash, today, to walk away. You sign the deed over, and your problems are solved." It was exactly what Eleanor needed. $45,000 wouldn't clear all her debt, but it would save her from bankruptcy. She reached for the pen Hodges produced from his coat pocket, but as she looked at the papers, a strange, prickling sensation washed over the back of her neck. Hodges was breathing just a little too heavily. His eyes were locked onto her signature line with a hungry, predatory intensity. Why was a high-powered attorney standing in the freezing rain to get a signature for a worthless, condemned lot? "I need to see the inside," Eleanor said suddenly, pulling her hand back. Hodges's polite veneer cracked. "Miss Gallagher, the house is unsafe. It's filled with garbage. There is absolutely nothing of value in there. My clients are making a very generous offer that expires by the end of the weekend." "Then I'll let you know on Sunday," Eleanor said, her stubbornness kicking in. She snatched the heavy brass key from his hand, Hodges glared at her, his jaw clenching, before turning on his heel and marching back to his Mercedes. "You are making a massive mistake, little girl," he threw over his shoulder. Unlocking the heavy oak front door, Eleanor stepped into a nightmare. The smell hit her first, a suffocating mixture of wet wood, rat droppings, and decades of stale air. The interior was a hoarder's labyrinth. Towers of yellowed newspapers, broken furniture, and boxes of worthless junk were stacked to the ceilings. For 2 days, Eleanor sifted through the debris. She wore a heavy respirator and thick gloves, tossing out garbage, looking for anything of value to justify keeping the house. She found nothing but rusted silverware and moth-eaten clothes. By Saturday night, utterly exhausted and freezing, she decided Hodges was right. She would sign the papers in the morning. But at 2 a.m., a violent thunderstorm rolled off the Atlantic. The booming thunder rattled the old house's bones, but it was a different sound that woke Eleanor from her sleeping bag on the living room floor. It was a rhythmic, metallic clanking coming from beneath the floorboards. She froze. The house had no power, no running water, and the furnace had been dead since the 1990s. There was no mechanical reason for that noise. Grabbing her heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar she had used for prying open stuck windows, Eleanor crept toward the basement door. The wooden stairs groaned agonizingly under Eleanor's weight as she descended into the basement. The air down here was different, colder, heavier, and reeking of sulfur. Her flashlight beam pierced the absolute darkness, revealing a massive, cavernous cellar with a dirt floor. The clanking sound had stopped. The only noise was the dripping of rainwater leaking through the stone foundation. Eleanor swept her flashlight across the space. It was mostly empty, a stark contrast to the hoarder's paradise upstairs. There was an ancient coal chute, a broken water heater, and a massive solid brick wall at the far end of the cellar. She walked the perimeter, her boots squelching in the damp dirt. As she paced along the back brick wall, her mind, trained by years of meticulous medical billing and data entry, noticed a discrepancy. The house above her was expansive, roughly 50 feet deep from front to back, but pacing the basement wall, she realized she hit the back brick partition at only 30 feet. There was 20 feet of missing space. Eleanor stepped back, shining her light on the brickwork. Unlike the rough, crumbling fieldstone that made up the rest of the foundation, this wall was made of uniform red bricks. It was old, but the mortar was noticeably newer than the rest of the 1890s house. Heart pounding, she tapped the crowbar against the center of the brick wall. Thud. Solid. She moved to the left and tapped again. Thud. Solid. She moved to the far right corner, near a stack of rotting wooden pallets, and tapped. Thwack. Echo. It was hollow. Adrenaline surged through her veins, erasing her exhaustion. She swung the heavy iron crowbar with both hands, smashing it into the mortar. Once. Twice. On the third strike, a chunk of brick dislodged and tumbled inward, disappearing into the darkness behind the wall. A blast of stale, incredibly dry air rushed out of the fist-sized hole, carrying the faint scent of old paper and dried lavender. Working frantically, Eleanor used the crowbar to pry away more bricks. Her hands bled through her gloves, but she couldn't stop. Within an hour, she had created a jagged hole large enough to crawl through. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her flashlight through the gap, followed by her head and shoulders, and tumbled onto a hard concrete floor. She stood up and shined her light around. She was in a windowless room, roughly 20 feet by 20 feet. Unlike the damp dirt cellar, this room was meticulously dry, lined with thick lead and concrete. It looked like a bomb shelter. In the center of the room sat a heavy mahogany desk. On top of the desk was a single, green glass banker's lamp and an antique typewriter. But it was what sat in the corner that made Eleanor drop her crowbar. It was a massive, military-grade steel safe. It stood 5 feet tall, its combination dial gleaming in the flashlight beam. Next to the safe was a stack of 5 aluminum lockboxes, the kind used for transporting banknotes. Eleanor approached the desk. The dust here was undisturbed, suggesting no one had been in this room for decades. Sitting squarely in the center of the desk leather was a perfectly preserved envelope with a wax seal. Written on the front, in elegant, looping cursive, were 2 words. For Eleanor. Her breath hitched. Beatrice had known she would come. Beatrice had known she would find this. With trembling hands, Eleanor broke the wax seal and pulled out a single sheet of heavy parchment paper. The letter read, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means you did not surrender to the vultures. You have the Gallagher grit, just as I suspected when you were a little girl. They will try to take this house from you. They will lie, they will threaten, and they will try to buy you for pennies. Do not let them. This town is built on a lie. The esteemed Whitmore family, who likely sent their lapdog Hodges to greet you, are not the noble founders they claim to be. They are thieves, and I have held the leash around their necks for 60 years. The combination to the safe is your mother's birthday, followed by the year my brother died. August 14th, 62. Use it to rebuild your life. Burn the rest." Eleanor rushed to the heavy steel safe. Her hands shook violently as she spun the cold brass dial. 081462. Click. She pulled down on the heavy iron handle. The hinges groaned, fighting against decades of stillness, and the heavy door swung open. Eleanor fell to her knees. The safe was packed, floor to ceiling, with tightly bound stacks of currency. But it wasn't modern money. They were pristine, uncirculated gold certificates and silver certificates from the 1920s and 1930s. Some bundles were marked with bands from the First National Bank of New England, a bank that had famously been robbed in a historic, unsolved heist in 1934. To collectors, these bills were worth hundreds of times their face value. There had to be millions of dollars in rare currency sitting in front of her. But on the bottom shelf, resting on a velvet pillow, was something far more dangerous. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger. Eleanor pulled it out and opened it. The pages were filled with Beatrice's meticulous handwriting. It was a flawless, irrefutable record of blackmail. Beatrice had documented dates, times, and exact amounts of hush money paid to her by the Whitmore family, the town's mayor, and a local judge. There were original photographs pasted into the pages, black and white images of the current mayor's grandfather, standing over the blown vault of the First National Bank alongside Thomas Whitmore. Beatrice hadn't just been a recluse. She had been the shadow queen of Blackwood, extorting the town's elite to keep their bloody history a secret. And now, Hodges and the Whitmore Development Group were trying to buy the house for pennies to bulldoze the evidence before anyone found it. Eleanor was holding the key to absolute wealth and the power to destroy the most prominent families in the state. Suddenly, a loud, violent crash echoed from the floorboards directly above her head. Eleanor snapped the ledger shut and killed her flashlight, plunging the hidden room into absolute darkness. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Footsteps. Heavy, hurried footsteps were moving across the living room floor directly above. It wasn't the slow, cautious walk of a burglar looking for a TV. It was the frantic, deliberate stomping of someone searching for something specific. Then, a voice echoed down the basement stairs. It was Hodges. "I know you're down there, Miss Gallagher." His voice rang out, stripped of all its previous polite charm. It was cold, echoing with a chilling malice. "My clients have run out of patience. You shouldn't have gone digging." Eleanor pressed her back against the cold steel of the safe, clutching the ledger to her chest, trapped in a tomb of her family's own making. The beam of William Hodges's flashlight sliced through the dusty air of the main basement, sweeping over the rusted water heater and the ancient coal chute. From her terrifying vantage point inside the hidden room, Eleanor pressed her spine flat against the side of the heavy steel safe, clutching Beatrice's leather ledger to her chest. Her breath was shallow, burning her lungs as she tried to remain absolutely silent. "I see the broken brickwork, Eleanor." Hodges's voice drifted through the jagged hole she had created. The polite, polished veneer of the high-powered attorney was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, venomous edge. "You just couldn't take the money and walk away, could you? You had to be stubborn, just like the old witch." Eleanor heard the crunch of his expensive leather shoes stepping over the rubble. He was right outside the wall. "Do you have any idea what you're dealing with?" Hodges continued, his voice echoing menacingly in the cramped space. "The Whitmore family built this entire county. Mayor Richard Caldwell, Judge Harrison Sterling. They own the ground you are standing on. For 60 years, Beatrice bled them dry with her little blackmail scheme, hoarding their money while this house rotted around her. When she finally died last week, they thought they were free. They thought they could just buy the property, bulldoze the evidence, and finally sleep at night. Eleanor's blood ran cold when she finally died." The way Hodges said it, so casually, confirmed her darkest fear. Beatrice's death at 91 hadn't been natural. They had expedited the process, and now they were going to do the same to her. A scuffling sound echoed as Hodges began to force his head and shoulders through the jagged opening in the brick. His flashlight beam wildly illuminated the lead-lined walls of the hidden room, finally settling on the open safe and the stacks of pristine, vintage currency. "Good God," Hodges breathed, momentarily distracted by the fortune. She didn't burn it. She kept the First National Hall. It was the distraction Eleanor desperately needed. Her eyes darted around the pitch-black room, searching for an advantage. She had dropped her heavy iron crowbar near the entrance when she first crawled in. As Hodges pushed his torso through the hole, one hand holding the flashlight and the other gripping a dull black handgun, Eleanor made her move. Driven by pure, unadulterated survival instinct, she lunged out from behind the safe. She didn't go for Hodges. She dove for the floor, her fingers wrapping around the cold iron of the crowbar. Hodges snapped his attention toward her movement. "Stop right there," he barked, raising the gun as he struggled to pull his waist through the tight gap in the bricks. Eleanor didn't hesitate. With a scream that tore from the bottom of her lungs, she swung the heavy iron crowbar with every ounce of strength she possessed, bringing it down hard on Hodges's wrist. A sickening crack echoed through the room, followed by Hodges's agonizing howl. The handgun slipped from his shattered grip, clattering across the concrete floor and sliding under the mahogany desk. "You little—" Hodges screamed, thrashing wildly as he tried to pull himself backward out of the hole. Knowing he would simply wait for her on the other side, Eleanor grabbed the flashlight he had dropped. She quickly shoved the leather ledger into her thick canvas backpack, grabbed 3 tight bundles of the 1934 gold certificates, and zipped it shut. She couldn't go back through the wall. Hodges was already scrambling to his feet in the main cellar, cursing violently. Eleanor shined her light upward. When she had first inspected the main basement, she remembered seeing the exterior door of the old coal chute. It was a slanted iron door that led directly to the side yard. If she could find the interior access point in this hidden room, she might have a chance. Frantically scanning the ceiling near the back wall, her beam caught a rusted iron latch. It was an old ventilation hatch, likely built when the room was designed as a fallout shelter in the 1950s, leading straight up into the chute's shaft. She dragged the heavy mahogany desk chair over to the wall, ignoring the violent kicks and hammering coming from the brick wall, as Hodges searched for another way in or tried to widen the hole. Scrambling onto the chair, Eleanor slammed the heel of her hand against the rusted iron latch. It didn't budge. "I'm going to kill you!" Hodges roared from the other side of the wall. "Come on, come on!" Eleanor sobbed, using the crowbar to pry at the rusted metal. With a deafening screech, the latch snapped off. She pushed upward with both hands, throwing the heavy iron grate aside. A shower of freezing rainwater and dead autumn leaves fell onto her face. The exterior chute doors had rotted open just enough to let the storm in. She hoisted herself into the narrow, slanted shaft, just as Hodges finally managed to smash his way back through the brick wall. He lunged for her ankles, his fingers grazing the rubber sole of her boot, but Eleanor kicked out violently, striking him squarely in the jaw. As Hodges tumbled backward onto the concrete floor, Eleanor scrambled up the muddy, rain-slicked chute and burst out into the freezing Maine thunderstorm. She didn't look back. She sprinted through the overgrown, thorn-choked yard, the heavy rain instantly soaking her to the bone. She reached her rusted sedan, fumbled her keys with shaking hands, and threw herself into the driver's seat. As the engine sputtered to life, Eleanor saw Hodges burst through the front door of the rotting house, clutching his broken wrist. She slammed the car into drive, her tires spinning wildly in the mud before catching the pavement, leaving 42 Sycamore Drive in her rearview mirror forever. Eleanor didn't stop driving for 5 hours. She knew better than to go to the Blackwood police. If the ledger was accurate, the town's entire law enforcement and judicial system were bought and paid for by the Whitmore family. Stopping anywhere in that county was a death sentence. She drove straight through the night, crossing the state line into Massachusetts, the rhythmic thumping of her windshield wipers the only sound keeping her grounded. By 8 a.m. on Monday morning, exhausted, soaked, and trembling with adrenaline, she parked outside the massive, brutalist architecture of the FBI field office in downtown Boston. When she walked into the sterile lobby, looking like a drowned rat and clutching a canvas backpack to her chest, the security guards almost turned her away. But when she demanded to speak to an agent regarding the unsolved 1934 First National Bank heist and produced a pristine bundle of 1928 gold certificates, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Within an hour, Eleanor was sitting in a secure conference room with Special Agent in Charge David Reynolds. He was a seasoned, no-nonsense man in his 50s, who listened in stunned silence as Eleanor recounted her inheritance, the ambush by William Hodges, and the hidden room. Then she placed Beatrice's leather ledger on the steel table. Agent Reynolds spent 2 hours reading through the meticulous 60-year record of blackmail. He cross-referenced the serial numbers on the bills Eleanor had brought with the FBI's historical database. They were a perfect match. "Miss Gallagher," Reynolds finally said, removing his reading glasses and rubbing his temples. "Do you realize what you've handed us?" "I know it's evidence," Eleanor said quietly, wrapping her hands around a hot cup of coffee an agent had provided. "It's a lot more than that," Reynolds explained, leaning forward. "In 1934, Thomas Whitmore and Mayor Caldwell's grandfather didn't just rob the First National Bank. They killed 2 security guards doing it. They got away with millions, but the bills were heavily tracked. They realized too late that they couldn't spend a dime of it without bringing the federal government down on their heads." Eleanor frowned. "Then how did they get so rich?" "They used the stolen cash as collateral to secure massive, legitimate loans from corrupt bankers out of state, building their real estate empire," Reynolds explained. "But your great-aunt Beatrice, she was the bank teller who survived the robbery. She recognized them. Instead of going to the police, she stole the physical cash from where they had buried it, locked it in a lead-lined room, and spent the next 6 decades making them pay her hush money in clean, untraceable funds. And now Whitmore Holdings was trying to buy the house, back to destroy the vault before the town seized it for taxes," Eleanor realized, the final puzzle piece sliding into place. "Exactly," Reynolds nodded grimly. "We are mobilizing a tactical team to Blackwood right now. By sunset, Mayor Caldwell, Judge Sterling, and William Hodges will be in federal custody under RICO charges. The house, and the stolen currency inside, will be seized as evidence." Eleanor's heart sank slightly. She had done the right thing, but she was still $80,000 in debt, and she had just handed over millions of dollars to the federal government. She had survived, but she was right back where she started. "I understand," Eleanor said softly, standing up to leave. "Wait," Reynolds said, raising a hand. He opened the back cover of Beatrice's ledger. Taped to the very last page was a small silver key. "You said you didn't read the whole book?" "I didn't have time. Hodges was coming." Reynolds carefully detached the key and slid it across the table. "Your great-aunt Beatrice was extorting the richest men in Maine for 60 years. They paid her millions to keep quiet. That money wasn't in the safe. The final entry in this ledger says that everything she rightfully earned is waiting for her heir in safety deposit box 402 at the First Seacoast Bank. Right here in Boston." Eleanor stared at the silver key, her breath catching in her throat. "The money in the house was stolen property," Reynolds said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But the money sitting in that safety deposit box? As far as the federal government is concerned, that is a legitimate legal inheritance from your great-aunt. No one can touch it but you." 3 days later, as the national news networks exploded with footage of FBI raids in Blackwood, Maine, and the arrest of the state's most prominent real estate developers, Eleanor Gallagher walked into the First Seacoast Bank. Her life was no longer defined by final notices and collection calls. When the bank manager opened box 402, Eleanor found it packed with bearer bonds, gold bullion, and clean, untraceable cash. The total value was over $4.2 million. Eleanor paid off her ex-husband's debts in a single, satisfying phone call. She quit her medical billing job, walked away from her cramped apartment, and bought a beautiful, sunlit home on the coast of California, as far away from the freezing Maine rain and crumbling Victorian houses as she could get. Great-aunt Beatrice had been difficult, terrifying, and deeply morally grey. But in the end, she had given Eleanor exactly what she promised: the power to burn her old life down, and the wealth to build a new one. If Eleanor's incredible journey from crushing debt to uncovering a decades-old town conspiracy kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Real life is often stranger than fiction, and there are more hidden stories waiting to be told. Share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories of mystery, betrayal, and hidden fortunes.